I am joined by Fran Fearnley, and Fran is the owner, operator, curator of ZimART Rice Lake Gallery. Would you join me in welcoming Fran? Tell us what, in a few sentences, what ZimART Rice Lake Gallery is, Fran.
So ZimART's Rice Lake Gallery is an outdoor sculpture park of Zimbabwean stone sculptures that's maybe a 12-15 minute ride here from Fourth Line on the north side of Rice Lake.
And you, like Rob Winslow, decided to put your work where you live. Yes, you live at the gallery?
Yep, that's right. Yeah, my house is right there, and I'm surrounded by sculptures from everywhere I look.
Okay, so tell me about Zimbabwean stone art and how you first encountered it, Fran.
Well, the gallery has been open now for 24 years, and it's actually its final year. And I was volunteering in South Africa in 1998 and was sent to Zimbabwe to do some work, and that traveled around the country and fell in love with Zimbabwean stone sculpture. So when I actually traveled the country and selected a few pieces for myself, which I took to a shipper. And when I got back to Canada 2 years later, my sculptures had not arrived. And I always describe it as my first lesson in international shipping, because I'd given the work to a shipper and I paid and I said I wasn't in a rush.
Is that the first mistake?
Deadly.
Okay.
But what happened a couple of months after I had returned was a friend from South Africa who was curating a show of this work in Washington, D.C., and he had set up for the work to travel around the US, and the plan started to fall apart. So I suggested to him that he ship the work up to my place, and I would try and see if I could sell it for him. So the first go was supposed to be just a one-off to help out this friend, and the response was so phenomenal that it gave me an excuse to go back and buy more and continue on.
So you first saw it in South Africa at a book fair, or did I make that up? Or did you see it in Zimbabwe?
In Zimbabwe, in a book fair.
And what is it for you that first time you saw Zimbabwean stone art that attracted you? Because you weren't a gallery curator, right? You are not that part of fine arts is not your background. That's right. Yes.
Yes, that's correct. I was a journalist before I started calling myself a curator, so it was a big switch of careers, and I'm still learning, I would say, even after 24 years, you always learn from the artists that you work with. But yeah, I've always loved just raw stone. I used to go to Buckhorn years and years ago, and they used to have, I think it was a Rockhound Festival, and I'd just go and pick up chunks of stone and polished rocks and that kind of thing. So I've always loved stone as a material, and I've always loved sculpture, so I guess the combination really blew me away, and particularly I would say with the Zimbabwean stone, because it is so varied and in some cases just incredibly colourful. So yeah, so that was the combo I think that got me.
So the first shipment never ever arrived. So you went back to Zimbabwe the next year and ordered more, and then eventually some must have come.
Yes, well, I learned from the first go-around, which is you don't deliver the goods to the shipper and say how much is it going to cost to ship them and say I don't care how long it takes. So the second time around I was much more circumspect, and as I've discovered since then is that you actually don't pay until things start to move. You know, they get on a truck and start to go to Durban in South Africa, which is where they're shipped from, or whatever. So I've at least learned that over the years, but the shipping really hasn't gotten any easier.
And I'm so fascinated because you have, is that driveway a kilometer long or half a kilometer? You have a very long and narrow driveway, and they come on humongous trucks. Is this not true?
Yes, the work is created in a 20-foot container. A couple of times I brought in a 40-foot container, and both times said never again. 20-foot container, which we have to ask the trucking company if they will pick a driver who really likes backing up, because the driveway is about, to where they stop, is about 400, 500 meters, and it's really just a laneway, and they have to be able to have the courage of their convictions to keep going without feeling they're going to fall over on the side.
So huge container truck backs down your driveway, and then do you have a forklift or something that unloads it all?
Forklift is way too sophisticated. We use a tractor.
Oh, really? Okay. And so tell me about how many pieces you have right now at ZimART.
Always get asked these tricky questions that have to do with numbers, when numbers are not my thing, but I'm just going to say 200. 200
pieces right now. And the gallery is open all summer, and people can come and, I mean, you hope they buy. That is what you're in the business of doing, is selling for the artists, but they also can picnic, and you have workshops. Tell me a bit about the artists that you've brought here over the 24 years. When did you start bringing resident artists?
Well, after the very first year, it became clear that if I was going to do it again, that I really needed to have an artist present, because so many of the questions did have to do with what inspired the artist, some technical questions about how they use the tools, the type of stone, and so on. So as of 2001, I started inviting an artist to come for the season. In the early days, it was more just to talk about their work and interact with visitors. And then a few years later, we started adding in stone carving workshops. So people come for either 2 days to learn the basics, or 5 days if they're more advanced with their skills and want to work on larger pieces. And I bring in stone from Zimbabwe that gets shipped with the sculptures. And people come and do, learn the basics of direct stone carving. So that's just hand tools, no power tools used whatsoever. And they also learn a lot about Zimbabwean culture, philosophy. We're always listening to Zimbabwean music the whole time. That's floating over the gallery. And of course, as they work alongside with the artist mentoring them, they get to hear about what inspires that particular artist and learn about their techniques and their approaches and so on. So it's a sort of an cultural immersion program.
And how many artists, here's a number, I'm going to ask for a number, how many artists are represented at the gallery right now, roughly?
About 50 artists.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, and so you go to Zimbabwe and you meet artists. Do you meet artists through artists? Is that how it all happens?
Yeah, it's a sort of a fraternity, I guess you could say. The artists particularly will share information about who's representing them and who's buying their work with their friends and so on. So you don't really have to look for them. Once you get started, there's more artists running after you than you could possibly ever represent.
Oh, wow.
That's been, I would say it's been difficult to say no more than anything, because you can't represent everyone. But yes, I travel around and I see the artists working in their studios, which are sometimes literally just, an awning outside of their house, and in other cases they're working together as a group in rural areas, in urban areas, and select the work that I see that they have completed, and in some cases fall in love with pieces that are in progress, and then I'll go back and watch the evolution of that piece whilst I'm traveling. I usually spend about a month and then go down to South Africa and come back for another month. The Zimbabwean government doesn't let me stay for longer than 30 days at a time, so I have to sort of shuttle back and forth.
Okay. And so there are 2 pieces here at the farm right now. There's the one piece on our endowment recognition, which is just on the west side of this concession barn, and then there's a piece that you every year so generously display. Tell us about the 2 artists and the differences in those pieces, because I think they kind of represent in some ways the diversity of the work at the gallery. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, I think that's actually a very good way of putting it. So the one that's in the in Portline's permanent collection is by a female artist called Pelagia Muchavaviri, and she was an artist in residence at the gallery about 12 or 13 years ago. So she came over, as does the artist, every year, and we had a body of work, and we had an exhibition, and she was also teaching. Her work is very abstract, which is unusual for the female artist. There's not very many women who sculpt. but those who do tend to sculpt much more representational work and often focus on the female form. And Pelagia is actually the only female artist I know, sculptor I know in Zimbabwe who's carving totally abstract. So it was kind of cool that that happened to be a piece that was chosen by Fourth Line last year. And then the one that we have here for the season, which is a much more literal piece, is by an artist called Vengai Chihuahua, who was also a resident artist with us at the gallery about 8 or 9 years ago. They're actually, I believe, they're both in the same stone, which is springstone, the hardest stone that the artists work with. And they like the hard stone because it allows them to do more things than some of the softer stones do, which may be more subject to breaking if they're in the middle of doing something really complicated, or where it's harder to make negative space through a sculpture because the stone is more vulnerable. So springstone is very popular. If you looked up that word in the dictionary or online, you would say, any geologist would tell you there's no such stone. And to some extent they would be true, but there are actually over 200 varieties of serpentine in Zimbabwe that the artists use for sculpting, and no geologist has gone in and given them all names because they don't have any mineral value, and they're not being sourced for, cell phones or whatever. So the artists have given these stones names themselves, and they call this black hard stone springstone because their tools spring back when they're doing the carving. So I always think that's kind of cool that they've really got their own world there and their own names even for the stones that they're carving.
All throughout Africa, are there tons of quarries? Pardon my ignorance on this. Or is Zimbabwe particularly special with a lot of stone?
Yes, it is. There's a 500-kilometer long mountain range that runs sort of like a bit of a spine that runs through the center of the country, and it's an ancient range of mountains and peaks. That it's actually called the Great Dyke, and it was formed, I don't know, a long time ago. But it's a igneous rock, and you can move from 1 kilometer apart and the color of the stone can be completely different. And the artists, because they know their country and they know their mountains and they know their stone, know which area to go to in order to source the stone that they use for carving. But even within this one mountain range, there's everything from kind of purple to black to oranges. It's greens. It's really a remarkable geological phenomena. And Zimbabwe, when you translate it into English, actually means house of stone.
Oh wow, I didn't know that. So do the artists, how do they get their stone? How does the stone come to them, or do they go to it? And then how do you get stone out of a mountain? Is it dynamiting it?
No, if you use anything like dynamite, you're going to make the stone very fragile and susceptible to cracking. So it's hacked out of the mountain. It's physically hacked out of the mountain. So there's the ability there for people who are living in these rural areas to claim a part of the mountain and say, that's our mountain. And then if the artists go there and they want stone, then it's those people who are going to be taking the stone out, so earning some income from doing the hard labor of hacking the stone out, and then also loading and buying the stone. So they literally actually go and buy the stone, and it's a source of income for rural areas where they may not have much other income to work with. So it sort of spreads the wealth a little bit. And the artists, if they're working on a very, very big piece, they sometimes will do what they call shaping right at the mine. So you could go to the mine and there may be 2 or 3 artists and they've got a piece of stone that's perhaps 2.5, 3 meters big, and it's already speaking to them, and so they're already starting to what they call sketch. That doesn't mean actually sketching on the stone, it's what they see as sketching, which is kind of roughing out the shape that is calling to them when they look at the stone.
Would that be with their tools?
With their tools, okay. Yes, with their tools, sorry. Because they don't want to expend any more energy than is needed transporting the stone to their home studio. So if there's excess stone there that they're in any quantity, then they're going to start with that shaping with the hand tools right at the quarry.
Well, tell me about the tools. How much of it is handwork and how much of it is electrical work? And tell us about the tools that are used, say, to get, like the woman and child, the mother and child, for example, is so detailed. Like the hair is unbelievable on her, and I've seen other equally evocative and amazing and emotional sort of faces on more of the naturalistic work. So tell me about the tools and that work.
Well, there is use of power tools in Zimbabwe. It's just I've chosen to just represent the artists who are working with hand tools. It's a very different process when they work with hand tools. It's slower, it's more contemplative, it's safer, frankly, because the stone dust is not as sort of tiny and likely to cause particles that were either bad for their eyes or their lungs. But they literally start off with what they call a chasing hammer, which the British call a brick hammer. It's a hammer with little teeth on it, and it's the starting process because it's kind of a fast way of roughing the outside of the stone, but it leaves a lot of marks on the stone. So going forward, they have to keep using tools that will make the stone smoother and smoother. So they start using chisels and files, and the files get more refined. And then when they've finished all of the shaping that they're putting into their effort there, then they will decide what parts they want to have polished. And those will have to go through 7 or 8 stages of sanding.
And is it hand sanding? I don't mean to interrupt you.
Sanding.
So starting with a heavier grit, like a more...
start with about an 80 grit sandpaper, and then they go through about 7 or 8 stages, finishing with sandpaper that's about 1,500 to 2,000. It's a water paper at that stage. If any of you have refinished an old car or something like that, that's the kind of sandpaper you can't even tell it's sandpaper. It feels almost completely smooth. And they use it with water. They actually call it washing the stone, because you start then to see the colors in the stone as they're beginning to do the finer and finer sanding. And then if they want areas polished, once they finish the sanding, they'll heat it. They usually build a fire and put the sculpture around a fire, and then they apply a transparent wax, and that sucks into the stone and draws out the natural color.
Wow, that's amazing. So how long, so something like, say, the mother and the child that we have here, what would be the length of time for the artist to realize a piece like that to its finished position, or to what we're seeing out there today?
I'm not really going to answer that question because I can't, in a way.
Okay.
The artists themselves don't track time. It's not really in their culture to do so, and it's also not something they're really interested in, and they have a very fluid approach. If they have a big or a very important complex piece they're working on, they're not going to just work on that exclusively. They'll go back and forth to something that's maybe smaller, easier to work, and honestly, after 24 years of doing this, I can never really give an answer as to how long one of the sculptures takes, because the artists are always, it's a question people ask a lot, because I think it's kind of something that we're interested in knowing, right?
Well, in Western culture, we're very focused on time.
We're very focused on time. I'm
just looking at the time right now, right? Like, no, we are, right? So it's baked into our culture. So I love that you say that. They don't know, not that they don't care, but it's not what they worry about.
Right, yeah, absolutely.
And these are, so when you go to the sculpture gallery, most of it's outside. There are a few pieces you can walk around Fran's house and see some.
Not anymore.
You can't walk around the house? Oh, what about the big one that I love that's on the turntable, the face? The profiled face, that big one?
Yeah, well, you see, we're actually all down at the lower end now, because we've been having such a great year.
Oh yeah, she's had a very good year, friends.
Moving down into...
You are? Okay. Is she still there?
She's going to Mexico.
Oh, you're killing me. I dream about her. I cannot not afford her. I have a very small one in my house, thanks to your generosity for our galas. But, so I am curious with the... Actually, okay, I have a few more pragmatic things. Quite often we get really freaked out when we put heavy things in our vehicles, because of axles and things like that. How on earth is all of this stuff transported, and do people ever say to you, I am not putting stone sculpture in my vehicle, it's going to wreck my vehicle, or how the shippers, like you found shippers who are willing to...
Well, we do, well, I say we in a very kind of grand way, but I actually don't do much of it personally. We do deliveries and installations. I've been working with Paul Hodgkinson, who some of you might know, for about 18 years now. He's a very talented photographer. He does all the photography on the website, but he's also kind of a Renaissance man, so he can do pretty much anything. And he is our chief installer. He figures out, we always ask for a video to show exactly where the vehicle will stop and where the sculpture is going to be placed. And we take it in a trailer, and we have something called a gantry that allows you to lift up the sculpture and place it over a pin and all of that kind of thing.
And you drill into them, like we drilled into the one for the endowment piece. You can drill in with your specifications and support from you folks around it. Oh, this is what I was going to ask. So when you go out there and all the sculpture is outside, it's okay to be outside? I guess because it's rock, it's okay to be outside, or stone, yes?
Yeah, stone is obviously from the outdoors. And the only thing that you worry about with stone, or with many things actually, if you think about erosion, is if there's a fissure. If there's a fissure in the stone where water can get in and expand and contract, particularly in our climate, that's a bit of a death knell for the stone. So I spend a lot of time when I'm in Zimbabwe really examining all of the pieces to make sure that there aren't natural fissures. The natural fissures would be perfectly fine for a piece if it were indoors, but if it were outdoors, then it could be subject to, particularly in this climate, a freeze-thaw cycle, which could be a bit disastrous. But so far, we've had, after 24 years, no problems.
You've never come back from a winter abroad and found one split in two from a fissure that you've missed?
No.
Oh my God, that's impressive. That's very impressive. And so now, okay, so you've sold the property, you've sold your home, and you're moving. Tell us a little bit quickly about the decision to do that, and where you're going, and how much you're taking with you, and where will the rest of the stone sculptures go?
Well, I'm very fortunate that I have friends who are purchasing my property, and they're very keen for it to still be a creative space. That's probably the best way of describing it. They'll continue to do the stone sculpting workshops. She's a retired art teacher and a very accomplished sculptor. So the sculpting classes will continue, our concert series will continue, and they'll be introducing all kinds of new things with artists who they know to come and give workshops there. They want to display work from Canadian artists who have outdoor sculptures. So it won't be a gallery that's open every day through the season, but it will still be a creative space that uses the grounds in, well, if you've been, you'll kind of know what I mean. It's kind of a bit special, the way it's evolved over the years. And I'm heading to Mexico with a private collection of sculptures.
How many?
Not telling you.
Why won't you tell me? Is it less than 100?
Yes, it is less than 100.
Okay, I won't ask any more, even though I want to play the game. And so this summer, you're still open. You have lots of sculptures still there. You do have a resident artist. Do you want to tell us about this summer's resident artist?
Yes, so our resident artist, Elias Naqueta, is actually not arriving until the 21st of August, thanks to the Canadian government and their slow walking of visas. But we were very fortunate that last year's artist in residence, Tapiwa Mapuranga, was able to come because he had a multiple entry visa. So he's been there up until now and handling the workshops and, you know, basically assuming the role of artist in residence until Elias can get there. A show of Eddie's work opened last Saturday. It's the first time we've had an opening of a show without the artist being present. But we sent him a video and sent him photographs of people with his work who bought his pieces, and he's really looking forward to coming, even though it'll be a very shortened contracted period for end of August, September, and well, he'll be there until we close at Thanksgiving.
At Thanksgiving. And how do you describe his work to us, if you could describe his work?
It's kind of bold, and he's not so much into detail. He's more into really sort of strong, bold pieces. His subject matter is women, as is often the case. Family. He's got some beautiful abstracts and animals as well, but he prefers to go with sort of broad strokes, if you think of it in painting, rather than Tapua, last year's artist in residence, who was very much into detail, and so they couldn't be more different in terms of their style, but both absolutely wonderful artists. And I mean, Eddie's work has just, even though he wasn't there for the opening, his two biggest pieces have already sold.
Are they still there?
Both of them reasonably local within Ontario.
Oh, okay.
And then a third piece, sort of his third biggest, sold to a doctor in California who just saw one of Paul's beautiful photos on the website. So, yeah.
Well, you know, ZimART has been a Rural Roots and Scenic Stages partner for many years, and we're so grateful for that. And we're going to miss you, and I hope that I'm excited to see what happens at the new space, or how they reimagine the space. But we still have lots of time this summer up until Thanksgiving to get over, and I know Maud and I will be able to have a picnic before it all, before the end of the season. And would you all join me in thanking Fran Fearnley?